It's the Believe in Texans podcast brought to you by FanDuel. And yes, I am back. I'll have an explanation for some of the absences or for what the absence at the end of this one. But man, I will make zero apologies for that victory yesterday. A game in which in the second half, D'Amico Ryans basically said, we've accepted that we very well might lose this game. Yet the players on the field, including at one point, when the Texans were playing with 7 defensive backs, not in a prevent situation, but just as their base defense. You had cornerbacks at Mike linebacker and Will linebacker on 1st and 10. They had pulled as many guys as they mathematically could and still found a way to win that game. The offense was, in a lot of ways, in the first half when the starters were in, it was a classic Texans offense. They had 5 out of 6 drives in which they scored, but too many of them ended in field goals. So when I give out my game balls, Kaimi Fairbairn, 6 of 6 on field goals, 2 of 2 on extra points. He was magnificent. He's going to have to continue to be magnificent if the Texans are going to go on a playoff run. Because what do you face in the playoffs? You face very, very good defenses at times. For those of you who don't know, and I'm guessing 100% of you do already, but just in case, the Texans will face the Steelers on Monday Night Football in Pittsburgh. Forecast temperature as of this moment is 33 degrees and partly cloudy. That's not bad. I'll take that as long as it's not windy, not overly cold, not overly wet or sloppy or anything like that. But we saw last night in the Steelers game that the Steelers have their own troubles in bad conditions there in Pittsburgh trying to kick field goals. It's a rough place. According to a study, the latest study I could find was from 2015, but I don't think anything's changed. Al-Shaair is the second hardest place in the league to kick field goals, right below Lambeau Field, place that the Texans will play next year, by the way. Bunch of potential cold weather games next year. The final opponents came out, and we might have time to go over there at the end. But the FanDuel closed with the Texans as 9.5-point favorites with an over-under of 37.5 points. So the Texans they hit the over. Yeah, way more points scored in this game with a little bit of help from Tommy Togiai and the defense. But Tommy Togiai is getting a game ball from me. That was magnificent. One of the best large men touchdowns I've ever seen, and it's the perfect finish to a regular season for a guy that's just really surpassed expectations. I think even the Texans who are high on Tommy Togiai, this tweet from Texans Jacob, Tommy Togiai has recorded a run tackle on 26.3% of his run defense snaps this season, the highest rate among defensive tackles with at least 100 run defense snaps this season. Togiai has also recorded the highest run stop rate among that same group of interior defensive linemen. I've stopped putting qualifiers in front of it. He's just a really good defensive tackle. That's all there is to it. Yes, he looks like a guy who's a run stuffer, but he's also just been a part of so many critical pressures that have led to interceptions. He had the pressure on the Al-Shaair interception in the Kansas City game. He had the pressure yesterday on the Elijah Huzzie interception. He's been really, really good and exactly what they need when you have guys like Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson who are screaming off the edges and Danico Autry and everybody else out there that can get push up the middle, but he stays in his lanes. He's been a revelation. Remember, the Texans extended his contract in the first couple of weeks of the season while he was still inactive on game day. So that's how much the Texans thought of him that they extended his contract. I know a couple people asked me, hey, are they going to be able to retain Tommy? They already did. They retained him back in September. So good job by Nick Caserio there. And good job by the Texans defensive coaches. Rod Wright, the defensive line coach, has done just an awesome job these last couple of years in taking guys who are, I don't want to say off the scrap heap, but guys that are not necessarily notable players like Tim Settle or Mario Edwards and really getting the best version out of those guys. And they've absolutely done that with Tommy Togiai. Danielle Hunter, I'll give a game ball to, just because they credited him with a sack. That's right. Because he caused the fumble on Riley Leonard. And all turnovers are reviewed. They said that was not a forward pass. That was a fumble. And off we go. The ball gets recovered down on the 1-yard line. And then Tommy Togiai almost would have had a touchdown, except that CJ botched the play. We'll get to that in a little bit. As far as CJ's performance, 14 for 23, 169 yards. I think that despite some of the glitches that we continue to see on offense, the illegal man downfield, CJ's intentional grounding, by and large, it's a cleaner operation. They scored on 5 of their 6 drives in the first half. You'd love to see them get into the red zone more and punch it in. They're just going to have limitations. They're the third worst red zone offense in the league right now, and they have been for some time. They worked their way up from second worst, so now they're above. It's New Orleans and somebody else. So that's where they are. I don't expect that to improve remarkably over the course, like after not being able to do it for 17 weeks, that all of a sudden they're going to hit it. But it is what it is, as the kids liked to say like 15 years ago. Now it's become a standard saying. Here's CJ on what he thought of the performance in the first half.
I think we moved the ball really well. And even the first quarter, we just, I had the intentional grounding and missed a couple reads, and I think, there was a couple of those, in every aspect. And I think at the end of the day, we overcame it, and that's a good thing. But we got to get those things fixed, if we want to go win in the playoffs. And I'm aware of that, and I think our coaches are, and I know everybody is here. So we're gonna get those things fixed, and but at the end of the day, it's all about finishing and getting wins. And I think the way we ended this game is a testament to how our season's kind of gone. A lot of up and down, But I think if you just stay faithful and you stay, and it's like I told y'all before, it's easy to have faith when it's easy, But when it gets a little hard, who has the real faith? And the work that we've put in, I think we trust in one another, to get the job done.
Yeah, you can't be playing like a bunch of upper middle class kids. Work like you got no money, okay? Have faith then. And it's difficult. Daddy ain't give you no trust fund. But I had a friend of mine that played basketball at Princeton, my brother-in-law actually, and Pete Carell, the legendary, very crusty basketball coach there. He used to, Brian, my brother-in-law, said that one of Pete Carell's things was if a player was soft, he's convinced that kid grew up with a cul-de-sac. And a two-car garage. If he had a two-car garage, that kid was soft. You wanted kids that didn't have two-car garages or any garage at all. Whenever he felt the player was soft, he's like, you had a two-car garage, didn't you? Yeah. So play like you got no garage in your parents' home. And I think there is a scrappiness to this team. They've got the best they've got the best scoring differential. I almost went into baseball mode. They've got the best scoring differential in the league in the fourth quarter. The defense remains the defense in the fourth quarter. Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson, in particular, have a lot of production in the fourth quarter. But on the offense, they have this knack now of figuring things out to either score points or, if not score points, do what needs to be done, which is just convert first downs and keep the defense off the field so you're not exposing them time and again to more possessions at the end of the game. And it's not the greatest show on turf, but it's what they need to get done. In terms of the red zone offense, here's the mixed bag. CJ had a great throw on a bootleg there in the first half to score the first touchdown to Jaden Higgins. The second touchdown was an improvised play that was botched because Tommy Togiai, the aforementioned game ball winning defensive tackle, was lined up at fullback. It was supposed to be a fullback dive. CJ didn't get the ball to him. You could tell watching that there was something off. It looked like it almost could have been a fumble, but then CJ scrambles into his right, gets a great block by Woody Marks and also a good block by Jaden Higgins. Both of those guys had to adjust on the fly, and they did a good job of it. This is a funny story, but the more I thought about it and stewed about it overnight, I'm a little bit upset about it. I'm very positive right now in general, but I'm a little bit upset about this explanation.
Tommy. It was a time I felt bad because, it's always weird when you're under center and, they got some big boys. So, and I know he's a big guy. And he's breathing and, I'm like, I got to get out. I don't want to get my foot stepped on. And so I, skipped out. And Gerard was like, don't skip on this play because it's going to happen faster than you think. And so we only walked through. We didn't, get a live rip, I don't think. But so I didn't skip. And then I went back to, my human nature. And I skipped out and I missed him. And I felt so bad. I went over there and did 5 push-ups for him. But I'm good, though. I'm good. We finished. He got his touchdown. Nobody can be bad at me anymore. But I'm just happy for my guy. I love Tommy. That's one of my Buckeye brothers.
Yeah, Buckeye brother. There you go. It bothers me that they ran a play in the game that they never did anything more than walk through. When you're inserting a guy into a very unnatural situation, you got a defensive tackle playing fullback, and it makes me wonder, like, where my first knee-jerk reaction, and maybe this is unfair, is that, man, you got to be a lot more dialed in on the details down in the red zone. We've had multiple instances this year where guys are good plays are negated down in the red zone or down on the goal line by false starts or guys aligning illegally. And I was kind of surprised to hear that they didn't at least run at full speed. You're not going to run at full speed, full go in a scrimmage situation or something at this point in the year. But it sounds like there could have been a little bit more attention paid to detail there. If we look at the Texans have had 24 red zone touchdowns, third worst in the league, remember. They on 2 of them, we know for sure they came on botched plays. There was the Jake Andrews, the snap where he skipped it off the turf underneath CJ's hands because he thought CJ was in gun, and it went directly to Woody Marks, and then Woody Marks gets in. So 2 out of 24 is what, 8? Is that 8.5%? I'm almost 100% wrong on that, but whatever. If almost 10% of your production in the red zone is coming off of plays that weren't designed the way they were called, I'm just wondering how many other botched executions there are on conventional plays or some of the wrinkled plays that they've added in. There's too many times I've seen, just whether it's in the red zone or in the middle of the field, where you can tell, on CJ got tackled for a loss last week by Khalil Mack. That was supposed to be a boot action. At least it looked like it was based on how CJ came out, and he turned to fake the handoff to Woody Marks, to hand the ball off to Woody Marks, but Woody Marks was on the other side of him. So he had to pivot around, and it just, the timing is all screwed up at that point. So is that an error on CJ's part? Is an error on Woody Marks' part? I would guess it's an error on Woody Marks' part. But meanwhile, Khalil Mack he's not seeing normal boot action, so it's not holding him in place. And that's why, people were furious with Nick Caley that he would leave Khalil Mack unblocked in that situation. That's what you do when you've got that boot action going. And if it's a good fake, it holds the defensive end in place just long enough, unless there's a blitz on or something. It's just poor execution. That's what we used to have an issue with Bobby Slowick about. All year long, I whined and whined and whined about how Bobby would blame it on poor execution. And I'd say, well, you're the offensive coordinator. You are responsible for the execution. It's not just being about a whiteboard warrior and drawing up the perfect play. You got to get guys to execute. So it was a positive play. I'm glad they were able to improvise their way out of it. It just concerns me that it's happening and that they're doing it with apparently a walkthrough in practice when you've got a fullback just lining up at fullback. It's like next week, hey, maybe we'll have Tommy run the zone read. We'll just have him go back there and go wildcat. Don't bother practicing it. Just walk through it a little bit. Maybe give him a little RPO action and let Tommy unfurl it into the end zone. These are my concerns moving into the playoffs, just in general. And then we'll get specifically into things that excite me about the Steelers matchup and things that we should be concerned about with the Steelers matchup. But the Texans are 3.5-point favorites at Pittsburgh on Monday night. After yesterday and after 2 series in the Chargers game, depth at cornerback. And I know that any Texans fan who's here 100% agrees with me. And it's not just that when Trevon Smith comes in, that he's not as good as Kamari Lassiter. It's that the combination of a backup cornerback, did I say Tremon Smith, a backup cornerback next to a new safety in Kayvon Wallace. And we saw immediately Alec Pierce, who we know he's a known deep threat. He averages over 20 yards per reception. He's had his way with the Texans on some choice plays in the past. But the miscommunication there and those 2 guys not being on the same page, we saw immediately. And the Titans get off with that early touchdown. That's a concern. If Kamari Lassiter is going to be back, and I assume Kamari would have played yesterday if it was a must-win game. Hopefully Kamari Lassiter's presence also gives you the better version of Kayvon Wallace. I don't know if he helps Kayvon Wallace catch that easy interception that he missed, but because the communication is so key when you've got a guy who's out there and is ingrained in the defense, and he's Kamari Lassiter as opposed to any number of backups, you're going to get a better version of Kayvon Wallace. But the Texans' ability to stop the big passing play is much improved from the first 2 seasons of D'Amico, but it's still one of the categories where they're not elite as a defense, which isn't the end of the world. Like the Rams are right about where the Texans are when it comes to explosive plays allowed. But with the Texans, it's usually a pass play that does them in. Texans are very good at preventing explosive run plays. Passing plays, not as much. And you're going to face some, if you make a playoff run, obviously, you're going to face some explosive passers. Aaron Rodgers, not one of them. Not that he's incapable of it, but they just aren't that great at getting the explosive pass plays. The offense's general stagnancy. This is the big thing, is that they can, as I talked about earlier, they've been able to consistently overcome some of these issues that they have in the first 3 quarters. And I would go back to the Chargers game as well, where, hey, yeah, you scored big in the first quarter, and that was ultimately what won you the game. But by the fourth quarter, they figured some things out, and they were able to move the ball. They need to figure out these cover zero all-out blitzes because, man, there's opportunities there. There are opportunities to be had. You saw the Ravens take advantage of when the Steelers had an all-out blitz. And was it Zay Flowers that got behind Jalen Ramsey? I think that was one of the Zay Flowers touchdowns. There are opportunities to be had when teams all-out blitz you, but it doesn't look like, A, the protection is always right, which is going to happen versus all-out blitzes. You can't always guess right on where to send the protection. But B, it just doesn't always seem like CJ has a hot route option. And whether that's on Kaylee or whether it's on CJ needing to get the routes adjusted when he anticipates blitz, that's something that I do think they can make improvement on. They have made improvement on it. They've made improvements within games when they're struggling with those kinds of things. But like it's not, I just don't want to see it turn into, oh, wow, we got the ball off for a completion. It's become the kind of team that teams are scared to blitz. That's likely not going to happen until next season. I can see the potential for it, but I think it is what it is during the playoffs. And the other big just concern in general is because of the reliance on field goals when you get into these bad weather games in the playoffs. If you end up having to go up and play in New England, or if you have to play at Denver at some point, you're not going to have to play at Buffalo. That's a real nice little occurrence. But because Kaimi Fairbairn is such a huge part of your offense, he set a record. I think I said this. He set a record for field goals in a season this year, which is not necessarily a great record to have. It's really cool for Kaimi, not necessarily so cool when it comes to the reason that he had to kick so many field goals. Let's see. This is CJ. He mentions a swarminess on offense. I believe the question was just how he feels about having the 9-game win streak. But the part swarminess, for those of you who don't know, SWARM is D'Amico Ryan's favorite acronym. Stands for Special Work Ethic and Relentless Mindset. Don't be a purist. That should read SWIRM, but he makes work ethic one of the words. So it's SWARM, Special Work Ethic and Relentless Mindset. The first couple of years, it was nothing but Texans on the list of swarmy players, or nothing but defensive players on the list of swarmy players. But here is CJ talking about the 9-game win streak.
Yeah, I think, when we don't get in our own way, even though every game, somehow, some way, that's going to happen and on both sides of the ball. But I think when you look at how we're built, roster to coaches to, scheme, we're built tough. And I think, you look at, and here you got swarm and, relentless. And I think, that's, what we try to embody every game. And I think we finally bought into it. And I think as an offense, swarming looks different than defense swarm or special team swarm. I think we found that groove. And, I'm just excited, man. I'm really, motivated to, get going this next week. But I'm going to enjoy this win and enjoy this regular season and, get back to work tonight. And I'm excited to, go in the playoffs and, try to make some noise.
Yeah, I think swarm on defense is kind of like heavy metal, and if you and swarm on offense, ideally should just look like real good rock music. So on defense, death metal. On offense, Just like maybe that's just like some of your harder grunge bands, and some of their faster songs. It's got to be a little bit more restrained, a little bit more on control, a little bit more like, hey, we clean this kid's hair up a little bit and everything. We might bring him home to meet our mothers. That type of thing. You want Swarm on offense to be almost like the Eddie Haskell, where like they dress up real good, but they got bad intentions, and you just don't know quite what to think of them. A lot of deception involved in offensive football. Back in the day, in the early days of football, there were some football coaches who felt that fake handoffs and what have you were not sportsmanlike, and that element of deception in football was uncalled for. Meanwhile, you had other you had other coaches. I think Pop Warner was one of them. They had all kinds of tricks up their sleeve. They would make their jerseys football covered. Sometimes they put pockets in the jerseys before all this stuff was ruled out of the game, so you could actually hide the football in the pocket in the jersey. So it's been a game of deception, despite some wannabe aristocrats at the Ivy League schools back in the 1800s trying to say that you shouldn't deceive. No, it's all about deception, especially on offense. This is the matchup versus the Steelers, which almost was not to be, obviously, if the Ravens kicker could just have kicked that very short field goal at the end of the game, you might be seeing the Ravens. But I think a lot of people really wanted Pittsburgh. Some people wanted the Ravens just so they could exercise those demons. A lot of people wanted Pittsburgh just because it's the perceived easier matchup. Based on last night's game, and we'll get into this deeper as the week goes along. Look, Aaron Rodgers, he is not a deep ball threat. When Kyle Hamilton was in the game before he had to leave, they couldn't do a damn thing. Kyle Hamilton's departure was a really big blow to the Ravens because they were making it very, very difficult for Aaron Rodgers. I have a hard time, even with Rodgers playing at home, seeing him turn into the guy that gets the worst version of the Texans defense as long as everybody's healthy. I think the Texans defense, no matter how you might feel, even though I know how it works because this works with me. The defense did not do great in the second half, and yet, remember, they were out there with almost nothing but backups. E.J. Speed was playing defensive end. E.J. Speed was playing defensive end. You had cornerbacks playing Mike linebacker. It was a skeleton crew out there of not even backups at their own position, guys playing vastly out of position, and they still managed to get that vital third down stop to force the Colts to kick a field goal. And that ended up being the difference in the game. So this defense is still very, very, very good. They did lose the number one scoring defense designation. The Seahawks, by way of holding the 49ers to 0 touchdowns the other day, they finished the season as the number one scoring defense by 0.2 points. Something like the Seahawks allowed 18.2 points per game, and I think the Texans were at 18.4, something thereabouts. Very, very close. Ultimately, that crap doesn't matter. You're a really, really good defense, and you're going to lean on that defense going into the playoffs. The Steelers' defense in some of their blown coverages was encouraging just because, look, they're not as good a defense as the Chargers are, and the Texans were able to take advantage of the very rare times and instances in which the Chargers had blown coverages. CJ was able to take advantage of it, and hopefully, if the Steelers present that same opportunity, they're going to be able to do it to the Steelers too. One reason to be grateful for playing the Steelers would also just be that you're not going to have to deal with Lamar Jackson, I think. And look, Lamar Jackson had a really weird second half of the season, and he was completing 50% of his passes for a large stretch of games. In the last couple weeks before last night's game, he was back up in the 60s, but he was throwing for like 100, 150 yards. Had to leave one of those games with injury. That's right. 2 weeks ago, he had to leave with injury. He looked more like himself physically. That one throw he made when the protection completely broke down, that was Lamar Jackson being Lamar Jackson. And Riley Leonard presented a very muted version of some of the same fixes you get into with Lamar Jackson, which is, man, you got to be dialed in on your run pass keys and on your zone reads and your RPOs and all of that, while also worrying about the quarterback actually just running for positive yardage. So it affects you in both the pass game and the run game. Lamar Jackson's obviously a much better quarterback than Riley Leonard, but I thought there were some breakdowns defensively that surprised me a little bit, even despite the circumstances in that game. It was just it was a little unsettling when facing the prospect of Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson teamed up together. The concerns, I think, if I had to look at the Steelers right now, and without matching them up too much against the Texans, just look at them or even basing it on last night's game. I think Warren and Gainwell, the running backs, they are good and solid and steady, and they're very capable of breaking tackles. But both of them average 4.5 yards per carry or more. The positive about that is the Texans' run defense has been very good. They're top 5 in yardage. They're top 3 in a whole bunch of categories like success rate and what have you. They do a really good job of, at times, it might bleed a little yardage in the run game, but it doesn't turn into explosive plays. And then they make up for it with tackles for a loss. And Kamari, you've got a cornerback who's one of the most lethal tackle for a loss guys on this already very good defense. So I'm not worried about that. I am worried about this. They've got stud defensive linemen. They like Cam Hayward specifically is just that full-grown man, can line up anywhere on the line of scrimmage, can hurt you on the interior. If you think back to like Chris Jones or various Seattle Seahawks, remember the Seahawks, their defensive line looks like they're almost all of them might as well be defensive tackles. The Steelers have some smaller, hybrid guys in TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith, but they are physically tough. They're disciplined. They present a lot of the problems that have been real issues for the Texans offensive line. Now, over the course of the second half of the season, as long as they have Trent Brown, the Texans have done a better job with that. Some of those real bad mismatches were earlier in the season, but we saw Chris Jones and what he did versus the Texans and what a headache he was for them. They managed to get over it and get through it. And they had to do that on the road in Kansas City. And, Kansas City and Pittsburgh, neither of them are as the defenses you think of as in terms of the peak version of them, but they still present a lot of problems. So that's the big challenge this week is really Texans offensive line versus that defensive front, the defensive linemen and outside linebackers for the Steelers. And then the one big one that I hate that I have to bring this up. And usually I hate historical stats because usually it'll be something like, oh, this team's really good on Monday Night Football. And you look at it and you're like, okay, well, they've done that with 3 different coaches and 2 different quarterbacks or what have you. The Steelers are 12-0 with Tomlin as their coach at home on Monday Night Football. Does this mean anything in the world? I'd like to think not. And streaks get broken every single day. So if anything, he's due. Tomlin is not great in the first round of the playoffs. So if we want to offset those two, might be a big nil on all of that. I'm excited as a Texans fan just that because this is the first time in our history, in our relatively short history as a football team, this is the first time the Texans have played a first round, a wild card playoff game anywhere other than Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Central. And that is something to rejoice about. So as far as my absence, I'll tell you, so Cecil had to stop doing the show, and he's got too many. Cecil's got 6 kids. He's a football coach and a principal, and he's got duties with the Texans, and it was just too much for him, which really threw me into a tizzy because I only accepted the Believe podcast responsibilities because I thought I was going to be doing it with Cecil twice a week. I know Cecil. I love Cecil. It was really easy to have a conversation with him. So when Cecil left, it was okay. I guess we could find somebody else that you're not comfortable with already, and old Sether's got the old social anxiety, or we could do it solo. And frankly, sometimes when I do 24 minutes solo, I just feel like a big old windbag. I could talk for another 3 hours without stopping, but I know that it's hard to be interesting by yourself with minimal audio-visual props and what have you over the course of a half hour. But I'm going for it, damn it. I'm going to go for it. I owe it to you. I owe it to the Texans. I owe it to the state of Texas, Bob McNair, and let's say Bobby Knight. There we go. Thank you to FanDuel for sponsoring this glorious podcast.